Our session explains how we use augmented reality in exhibition. Can it really engage audiences and bring objects and stories to life in new ways? Riot 1831 at Nottingham Castle was a digital research and development project funded by ACE, Arts Council England, Nesta and AHRC. I'll first cover the background, why we did the project in the first place, and I'll show a film of the final exhibition. Roma will then share the project's journey, and I'll round up at the end. So let's visit Nottingham Castle Museum and Art Gallery. So its exterior is a 17th century ducal palace that becomes relevant soon, built on the site of a medieval castle. The site's history gallery was 25 years old and took a traditional book-on-the-wall approach. We then developed fragments, an exhibition presenting objects from the site's 1,000-year history, with films including some replica versions of the objects. But visitors weren't able to make the connection between the objects on display and the replica objects in the films. And on reflection, the films were just too long-winded, and the overall approach was too disjointed for visitors. I felt that we weren't really releasing the potential of the stories of some of these amazing objects that linked to one night of drama on the site, the 10th of October 1831, when the site was attacked, looted and burnt by Reform Bill rioters. They were mad at the Duke, the owner of Nottingham Castle, for voting against parliamentary reform. Interesting, we also had a range of perspectives from that one night. The lodge keeper who was working on site as the mob was approaching, the journalists on the streets at the time, access to the diary of the hated Duke, and perhaps most intriguingly and controversial, a memory of a young child held up at her bedroom window watching the scene unfold. My instinct was to focus on this one dramatic night. But how should we tell this story today? And who could help us explore the potential of emerging technology, as we certainly didn't have those skills in-house? There were lots of discussions happening at high level about a very large-scale site transformation as well. So this was the background to our project. So before Roma shares the project's development, we thought it'd be useful for you to see what we ended up with. So the exhibition initially opened a year last May. It's still open now, of course. As you can see, it has objects, suspended iPads with these augmented reality scenes, wall projection, a touch screen, and a large chalk wall for visitors' comments. It works as one whole. Objects and iPads take center stage, but crucially, visitors take control of how their experience of the story unfolds. I now hand over to Roma to share how the project developed.
So AR is commonly used as a tool to trigger digital content in museums, and it's been being used for a long time. In this particular project, we were interested in it being used almost like a live narrative platform. My background is a theatre designer, so I work in site-specific theatre, scenography, and costume design. And so our interest was trying to make something a little bit more theatrical, to tell a story in a way using augmented reality, not just as a tool, but as a medium like you would use any sort of artistic medium, and how far can you take augmented reality. The team was an interesting team that we created. It was a multidisciplinary team that made up of 3D computer animation professionals, people from app programming, museum exhibition curating, academics from theatre design, film, computer science, especially human-computer interaction, and history. And so the main team that was created this was we are looking for a sort of a sense that if we create a diverse team, will we have something that we could bring a little bit more from our own perspective of what we can make out of these objects. Interestingly enough, we weren't interested in games being used. We were interested in narrative and storytelling. Now, an interesting aspect of telling stories is the sort of meanings that it can bring into the present. So even though the story was 1831, we were looking at what was happening in the world today. Now, we started this project about 3 years ago and started talking about it, and the economic crisis in the world around was happening at the same time. At the same time, we had riots, we had sit-ins, we had a lot of talk everywhere in the medium about this. So our interest was to see how we can update this history to the present so it becomes more meaningful for someone to go in there. Now, the riots of 1831 was an economic and political riot. And so it was very important for the castle. So the aim was not just to adapt it, but also to understand what a mixed reality environment will be like. And from the diagram you see up here, what you're looking at here is a gallery space which was redone for this exhibition. So some pieces in the collection was new to the gallery space. We included hanging iPads, as you will see. But the important thing about this space is that there are 3 entrances. So when you're trying to tell a story in a space with 3 entrances, you have to think, we can't really do linear stories. And anyway, even if there was 1 entrance, you can't dictate in a museum where someone is going. They may go right across the room because something catches their eye. So how do you tell stories? And what is the effect if you begin a story like this? Now, our story, like any narrative drama, had a setting, plot, and characters. So the setting was Nottingham Castle. It was, the plot was to burn the castle. The rioters' aim was to burn the castle. It happened all in one night, starting from 7 in the night and continued at 9. And then our characters in our stories were the rioters and the people who witnessed it. So we had very much a linear story, and issues of how we create that linear story and how we guide the visitor through that was something that we needed to develop. However, in terms of digital medium, we know that digital media creates a sense that we are now we use one screen, we are looking at television on another screen, we're looking at what happened in that film in another screen. So we are looking at one particular area, one particular film or show, and we are looking at it in diverse ways now. Rather than just singularity, we're looking at the film. There's a lot of connection with other things that we're looking at. So when we came to the issue about linearity and non-linearity, what happened is that we had issues with some partners in the project. We had issues where some of our focus groups were interested in a kind of linear storytelling, and some of the curators at the museum also. So we had issues, and so to solve that situation, we needed to put up kind of signs of the timeline. So and the app was created with a sort of timeline. So it means that if you were following the app around the museum space, you were going from the arrival at the castle to when the castle burnt in the last phase. And so linearity is something I think that is important and interesting to kind of look at as well, to see whether we can then create stories that are non-linear. And how do we create such stories that are non-linear? So important in the exhibition and looking at augmented reality as a medium is the body in space. We were not interested in a screen that you just look at. We're interested in finding out what is augmented reality as a medium can do that no other medium can do. And that was our real exploration. How can we make that iPad not just sit here and walk around, but how can we have the physical body of that person moving around in the space? And how can that physicality tell the story as well? So that was one of our aims. And so there's a great atmosphere in the space. And if you look at the background in that image there, that is showing the riots that happened in the UK. And so that's modern day riots on a video, just juxtaposition with other historical objects at the same time, at different scales. So we were interested in how that would work. Now, in terms of when looking at staging, if you're thinking of staging augmented reality, you're looking at things that were important to us, was things like your kind of first-person perspective. We came across, which was very useful in the collection, is that we had eyewitness reports and perspectives of everyone. So everything was done in a kind of first-person perspective. Creative aspirations versus sort of digital media constraints. You can download the app, you can use the iPad at the exhibition, or you can use it on your mobile phone. Therefore, there are constraints in the physical medium on how you can tell your story. And how do you tell your story with very few props, for example? And how do you tell your story with less characters? And how do you then restrict the length of a story because your visitor only has a few minutes? The castle has a number of other galleries. A visitor might come first to this gallery, or they may come at the end of their journey to the gallery. And so keeping things shorter is something that we learned. Some of our stories we feel are still too long. And we need to create and be able to develop that more. The important things in terms of the physical action is, I'm going to go through some of these with you now, is this one in particular, which was a lace scarf. When you put your iPad in front of the lace scarf, you get some hands that appear. Now, what was important for us is that we augmented with the object always on the screen. Now, we did a eye tracking exercise with 6 people as part of the research. And what Adrian and I realized is when we were looking at what are we looking in this data, and we realized there were 2 things. We kept thinking about the augmented reality and the object, but then we realized there was one more thing. There was the augmented reality, the object, and the object on the screen with the augmented. So there was a 3rd thing. So are you looking at the object if you're looking at it via the screen? Because you're looking at it live, you are controlling a live camera. And is that enough, or do you have to look at the object without the screen? You're not looking at it via the camera. And it was something that we hadn't thought about in terms of when you add digital within a kind of augmented space, because you are looking at the real object. We found people also use the iPad to zoom into the object, because with augmented reality, it means that if I can move forward. If I move forward, I'm using the camera, the live camera. So I'm zooming into the object. And so people used and adapted the camera, because it was live, to zooming in as well. So we had various use of the camera. This particular one, after you interacted with the boy, you lifted your iPad, and 360 degrees, a bit like this room, you moved around. And that was augmented in the space with everybody else, as you can see in the picture up there. We were interested in showing, for example, this was talking about Nottingham City. So the idea was that if you're talking about Nottingham City and there are objects in the museum, let's juxtaposition the object with the augmented information. So you were looking at the object in the live as well as the augmented information as well. This one in particular, the print was too small. So each object created some issues. Each object was slightly different. We use tapestry, we use a lace, we use 3D models, we use digital prints. So we were looking at oil painting. We were looking at different objects that you might encounter, and how can you augment those through image recognition. And so we use different ways of telling the stories. And in this particular one, we were looking at touch events for conversation. So you will touch the screen for the next episode of the story and then touch again for the other. And there were issues connected to this one. We had a lot of aspirations on having hundreds of rioters coming in, because this was when we were outside the castle. That didn't happen. The constraints of the medium meant we had to look at another way of showing it. And so we ended up using sort of 2D images instead of 3D images. And so very often you have to find different solutions in order to working with this. And the R&D process enabled that to happen in a quite interesting way. This one was a recreation, more like a virtual reality aspect of this. This was a recreation of the room, which is not, that was burnt, but is not, cannot be seen today. And so that was this is a 360 virtual reconstruction of this. And you moved around here, but it wasn't augmented in the space. So it was completely 360. You can go up, down, and all you're seeing is that room in that space. So we were experimenting with different ways of moving. The issues we've had with this is physically there are issues in terms of everything was made in-house in terms of the construction of the iPads hanging. And it has taken a lot of wear and tear in the last year and have had to replace quite a few times, actually. Because of that, the use of it. I mean, it was important for us to have accessibility rather than depend on someone bringing their iPads in. And the accessibility, that's why we included the iPads in the exhibition. And so this one was augmented a model, a scale model, and this had a lot of interaction points. You were, at this point, helping the rioters burn the castle. So it's a question whether you help them or not of burning the castle. You helped them by putting furniture on it. This one was one of our most successful in terms of, we didn't realize because it was really tiny on your screen, but it was very successful, this one. And our last piece sort of augmented two things at one time. You looked up and saw the castle, and you looked down, and we augmented images there where you saw the other eyewitness account looking overhead on umbrellas. So the physical placement of the object was important for us because the eyewitness report was looking down, and so her perspective was looking down at this. And so that was the sort of aspect of the exhibition, and I will pass you on to Adrian as we're a bit short of time now, and he will wrap up with the end.
So just briefly, obviously there's lots of things we've learned from the project, not just the technology. We've had to introduce subtitles and BSL signing in the gallery since. We knew from the outset that our very first focus group was with the people with a range of disabilities, but we couldn't provide subtitles within a real-time app because obviously visitors govern how long something lasts, so then you couldn't have a pre-subtitle section. So we've worked with companies since then, so we now have this available in the gallery, and this is also informing future developments on site, which are major things, which isn't actually anything to do with the tech side of it. It's to do with telling stories and multiple narratives. If you'd like to know more, then obviously we've left some cards on your seats. There's a lot of resources online. There's a website for the project. There's the YouTube films are on there as well. And if you'd, of course, love to come and visit us at Nottingham Castle, my details are on there as well. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you.